my sister Cordelia started digging that hole in her backyard at 3 in the morning, our neighbors called her crazy. The police thought she'd lost her mind. Even I wondered if grief had finally broken her. But what she pulled from that ground 3 days later would make headlines across America and change everything we thought we knew about our quiet little town of Millbrook, Ohio. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Thaddeus Maven, and this is the story of how my sister became the most famous archaeologist in the country by accident, how our dead father somehow guided her to the discovery of a lifetime, and how a family on the brink of falling apart found their way back to each other through mud, sweat, and ancient copper artifacts that shouldn't exist. Cordelia wasn't supposed to be the one making headlines. That was never her style. She was the steady one in our family, the responsible older sister who became a high school history teacher because she wanted to inspire kids to love learning the way our father had inspired us. While I bounced between startup jobs in Columbus, never quite finding my place, Cordelia had her life mapped out perfectly. She had her cozy house, her lesson plans, her weekend pottery classes, and her quiet contentment with a simple, predictable life. Our father, Edmund Maven, was the dreamer in the family. He spent 37 years as a geology professor at Ohio State, but his real passion was what he called unconventional earth sciences. While other professors stuck to textbook geology, Dad chased theories about lost civilizations, unexplained mineral formations, and archaeological anomalies that mainstream academia dismissed as fringe science. Mom used to joke that Dad collected rejections from scientific journals the way other people collected stamps. But Dad never gave up believing that the land itself held secrets waiting for the right person to uncover them. He'd take Cordelia and me on what he called discovery walks through the woods behind our house, teaching us to read the landscape like a book. He'd point to unusual rock formations and say things like, "The earth remembers everything, kids. You just have to know how to listen." Cordelia inherited Dad's analytical mind, but not his wild theories. She preferred facts she could verify, lessons she could teach with confidence. When Dad would get excited about some new theory he was developing, Cordelia would listen politely but never really engage. She loved him, but she thought his unconventional research was just his way of staying young at heart. I was different. I loved Dad's crazy ideas even when I didn't understand them. Some of my best childhood memories were of Dad spreading geological surveys across the kitchen table, showing me how to read topographical maps, explaining how underground water systems worked. But as I got older and started focusing on my own career, those conversations became less frequent. I figured Dad's theories were harmless hobbies, interesting but ultimately irrelevant to real life. Then, 6 months ago, Dad died suddenly of a heart attack while grading papers in his office. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. The whole family was devastated, but Cordelia took it the hardest. She'd always been Dad's favorite, though he tried not to show it. They shared the same methodical approach to problem solving, the same love of historical details, the same way of pursing their lips when they were thinking hard about something. After the funeral, Cordelia inherited the family house where we'd grown up. Our mother, Vivian, had moved to Florida 2 years earlier to be closer to her sister, so the house sat empty except when Cordelia was there. She started spending more and more time there instead of at her apartment across town, saying she felt closer to Dad in the rooms where he'd lived and worked for over 30 years. That's when the strange behavior started. Cordelia began going through Dad's research with an intensity that worried me. She'd call me at weird hours reading passages from his journals that didn't make sense to either of us. Technical notes about soil composition mixed with cryptic references to the Millbrook anomaly and subsurface discontinuities that sounded more like science fiction than geology. She started having dreams about Dad, too. Not normal grief dreams, but vivid, specific dreams where he would show her maps and point to locations in the backyard, repeating coordinates over and over until she woke up with numbers burned into her memory. She told me about these dreams with the embarrassed laugh of someone who knows how crazy they sound, but can't shake the feeling that they mean something important. The night she started digging, I was 43 miles away in Columbus, completely unaware that my sister was about to turn our ordinary childhood home into the most significant archaeological site discovered in Ohio in over a century. I had no idea that Dad's fringe theories were about to be vindicated in the most dramatic way possible, or that our family was about to become the center of a media storm that would change our lives forever. All I knew was that my phone was ringing at 3:47 a.m., and Officer Patricia Hendricks was telling me I needed to come to Millbrook immediately because my sister was digging a hole in her backyard and refusing to stop. I drove to Millbrook in a panic, making the 43-mile trip in just under 35 minutes. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Cordelia had been struggling since Dad's death, but she'd never done anything this erratic. The responsible sister I'd known my entire life didn't dig holes at 3 in the morning. She didn't ignore police officers. She definitely didn't create neighborhood disturbances that required family intervention. When I pulled onto Maple Street, the scene was surreal. Police cruiser lights painted the quiet suburban street in alternating red and blue, and I could see neighbors gathered on their porches despite the early hour. Mrs. Whitmore from next door stood in her bathrobe, gesturing animatedly to another officer while pointing toward our childhood home. I found Cordelia exactly where Officer Hendricks said I would, in the backyard, standing waist-deep in a hole that was maybe 4 feet wide and getting deeper by the shovelful. She was covered in dirt from head to toe, her usually neat brown hair escaping from a messy ponytail, but her movements were methodical and purposeful. She wasn't acting like someone having a mental breakdown. She was acting like someone with a job to do. "Cordy, what are you doing?" I called out as I approached the hole. She looked up at me with eyes that were tired but completely lucid. "Thad, thank God you're here. I tried calling you earlier, but it went straight to voicemail. It's 4 in the morning. My phone was on, silent. The police called me. They said you wouldn't talk to them. I told them I was excavating my own property and wasn't breaking any laws." She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of mud. "Technically, I'm right." Officer Hendricks approached us, looking relieved to see me. "Sir, we've been trying to convince your sister to take a break. She's been at this for over an hour, and the neighbors are concerned." "I can hear you," Cordelia said without stopping. "Her digging. And Mrs. Whitmore needs to mind her own business. She's called the cops on the Martinez family 3 times for having barbecues on Sunday afternoons." I studied my sister's face in the dim light from the police flashlights. She looked exhausted, but not unhinged. Determined, not delusional. "Cordy, why are you digging a hole in the middle of the night?" She finally stopped digging and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were kids and she'd figured out a particularly challenging math problem. "Because Dad told me to. Dad's dead, Cordelia. I know Dad's dead." Her voice carried a mix of patience and frustration. "But he left me something, Thad. In his journals, in those dreams I've been having. Look." She climbed out of the hole with surprising agility and led me to a card table she'd set up near the back porch. Under a battery-powered camping lantern, I saw what looked like a command center. Dad's geological journals were spread open, their pages marked with sticky notes and colored flags. Hand-drawn maps covered every available surface, some in Dad's familiar handwriting, others in Cordelia's neat teacher script. A metal detector sat beside a collection of tools that looked more professional than anything I'd expect a high school history teacher to own. "Where did you get all this equipment?" I asked. "I've been researching for 3 weeks, learning about proper archaeological techniques, soil analysis, grid excavation methods." She picked up one of Dad's journals and flipped to a page marked with multiple bookmarks. "Dad wasn't just theorizing, Thad. He was documenting. Look at these coordinates." She pointed to a series of numbers written in Dad's careful handwriting, accompanied by sketches that showed elevation changes in soil. "Composition notes. These match exactly with the spot I'm digging. Dad measured the entire backyard in 1987, right after we moved here. He found anomalies in the ground-penetrating radar patterns that suggested subsurface structures." I looked at the maps, trying to make sense of the technical notations. Ground-penetrating radar. Dad had access to that kind of equipment through the university. He ran surveys on dozens of properties around Ohio, always looking for signs of pre-Columbian settlements. But this property, our property, showed the strongest readings he'd ever recorded. Officer Hendricks had been listening to our conversation with growing interest. "Ma'am, are you saying you think there's some kind of archaeological site in your backyard?" Cordelia nodded. "I think Dad spent 20 years trying to work up the courage to dig here. He never wanted to disturb our family home, but he documented everything he found. These dreams I've been having, they're not just grief hallucinations. My subconscious has been processing all the information in his journals, and the dreams are showing me what he never had the chance to discover." I looked at my sister standing there in the pre-dawn darkness, covered in mud, but speaking with the calm authority of someone who had done her homework. For the first time since Dad's death, she sounded like herself again. Not the grieving, lost version of herself, but the analytical, methodical sister who had tutored me through high school calculus and never gave up on a problem until she'd solved it completely. Officer Hendricks seemed satisfied with Cordelia's explanation and left around 5 in the morning. But our problems were just beginning. By 7 a.m., Mrs. Whitmore was back outside, this time with her husband Harold and their dog, all 3 of them staring over the fence like we were running some kind of bizarre morning entertainment. "Cordelia, honey," Mrs. Whitmore called out in that fake sweet voice she used when she was about to complain about something. "What exactly are you planning to do with that hole?" Cordelia didn't even look up from her digging. "Archaeological excavation, Mrs. Whitmore. Perfectly legal on my own property. Well, it's just that Harold and I are concerned about property values. And the noise. That metal detector was beeping until past midnight last night." I watched my sister's jaw tighten, the same way it used to when kids in her classes wouldn't stop talking during lessons. "I'll be as quiet as possible. But this is important work." Harold leaned over the fence, trying to get a better look at the hole. "What kind of important work requires digging up your backyard? Seems like something you'd want to hire professionals for." That's when I saw the flash of anger in Cordelia's eyes that I'd been worried about. She threw her shovel down and marched toward the fence. "Harold, I'm a professional. I have a master's degree in history with a concentration in archaeology. My father was a geology professor for nearly 4 decades. We know what we're doing." "But sweetie," Mrs. Whitmore interrupted, "your father was a lovely man, but everyone knew he had some unusual ideas about things. Remember when he tried to convince the city council that the old Miller property was built on an ancient burial ground?" I stepped forward before Cordelia could respond. "Mrs. Whitmore, we appreciate your concern, but Cordelia has every right to excavate her own property. If the noise becomes an issue, we'll work around neighborhood quiet hours." After the Whitmores retreated to their house, I could see the stress building in Cordelia's shoulders. She'd been running on adrenaline and determination for hours, but the reality of community judgment was starting to weigh on her. "They think I'm losing my mind," she said quietly, sitting on the edge of the hole with her feet dangling into the excavation. "Are you?" She looked at me with a tired smile. "That's what I keep asking myself. But Thad, look at this." She handed me her phone, open to a weather app. I started digging Tuesday night because the forecast showed 3 days of clear weather. After that, we're supposed to get almost a week of rain. If there's something down there, this might be my only chance to find it before the hole floods, and I have to start over. So this whole thing is time sensitive. Everything about this is time sensitive." Her voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "I took emergency personal leave from school, which I can only do for 5 days without risking my job. The neighbors are already complaining, which means I probably have until this weekend before someone files a formal noise complaint or calls code enforcement. And Mom has been texting me every hour since yesterday asking if I'm okay, as if on cue." Her phone buzzed. Cordelia glanced at it and sighed. "Speak of the devil. Mom wants to know if she should drive up from Florida." "What did you tell her?" "That I'm fine and working on a research project," which is technically true. She stood up and brushed dirt off her jeans. "But she's worried, and I don't blame her. From the outside, this looks exactly like a grief-induced breakdown. From the inside, how does it look?" Cordelia was quiet for a long moment, staring down into the hole she'd spent hours creating. "Like the most important thing I've ever done. Like Dad's been trying to tell me something for months, and I'm finally listening." Like maybe all those years of him being dismissed by his colleagues and laughed at by neighbors were leading up to this moment. Or like you're putting everything at risk for a theory that might be completely wrong. Yeah, that too. By noon, word had spread through the neighborhood. I counted at least 6 people who found excuses to walk past the house, all of them slowing down to stare at Cordelia's excavation. A few of them stopped to chat, and while most were polite, I could hear the underlying skepticism in their voices. Questions about whether she had proper permits, whether the digging might affect the water table, whether she'd considered what would happen if she actually found something. The worst part was that Cordelia had considered all of these things. She'd researched local ordinances, checked utility maps, even called a lawyer to make sure she wasn't violating any regulations. But her careful preparation only seemed to make people more suspicious, not less. "It's like they want me to be having a breakdown," she told me while taking a water break. "If I was just acting crazy, they could dismiss it. But because I'm being methodical and professional, they think I'm being calculated and deceptive. Maybe we should call it quits for today. Let people adjust to the idea gradually." Cordelia shook her head. "I can't stop now, Thad. I'm already down 4 feet, and the soil composition is changing. Dad's notes say the anomalies start around 6 feet down. If I stop now, I might never work up the courage to start again." That's when our Uncle Bramwell's truck pulled into the driveway. Uncle Bramwell stepped out of his beat-up Ford pickup looking like a man on a mission. At 62, our father's younger brother had the same stubborn jaw as Dad, but where Dad channeled his determination into academic pursuits, Bramwell used his for more practical matters. He owned a small construction company in Cincinnati and had never met a problem he couldn't solve with the right tools and enough elbow grease. "Thaddeus called me," he announced without preamble, walking straight toward the excavation site. Said, "Cordelia's been digging holes and worrying the neighbors." I shot a look at Cordelia, who was glaring at me with the fury of someone who'd just been betrayed by her closest ally. "I didn't call him to stage an intervention," I said quickly. "I called him because I thought you might want some backup support." "Same thing," Cordelia muttered, but she climbed out of the hole to face our uncle properly. Bramwell walked around the excavation, examining Cordelia's work with the critical eye of someone who'd supervised construction sites for 40 years. "This is good work," he said finally. "Clean sides, proper depth progression, no safety hazards. You've been doing your research." Cordelia looked surprised. She'd clearly been expecting criticism, not professional evaluation. "You're not here to tell me I've lost my mind? I'm here because your brother is worried about you, your mother is, calling me every 2 hours from Florida asking if I think she should come home, and frankly, I'm curious about what's got you so convinced there's something worth finding down there." Bramwell had always been the practical balance to our father's theoretical nature. Where Dad saw possibilities, Bramwell saw logistics. Where Dad theorized, Bramwell built. But despite their differences, the two brothers had respected each other deeply. If anyone could understand both the scientific reasoning behind Cordelia's project and the practical challenges she was facing, it was Uncle Bramwell. "Show him the journals," I suggested. Cordelia hesitated for a moment, then led us to her makeshift command center. Bramwell studied the maps and notes with the same careful attention he'd given to her excavation technique. He asked pointed questions about soil composition, drainage patterns, and structural stability. Unlike the neighbors, he wasn't questioning her sanity. He was evaluating her methodology. "Edmund always was thorough," Bramwell said after reviewing several pages of their father's research. "These readings from the university equipment, they're legitimate?" "Completely. Dad ran 3 separate surveys between 1987 and 1994. All of them showed the same subsurface anomalies." "And you've been having dreams about this?" Cordelia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like your subconscious has been processing information your conscious mind hasn't fully integrated yet. It's not magic, Cordy. It's just how the brain works sometimes." I watched my sister's posture change as she realized Uncle Bramwell was taking her seriously. For the first time in days, she didn't look like she was defending herself against skepticism. "The thing is," Bramwell continued, "you're doing this the hard way. One person with a shovel, working against time pressure and neighborhood complaints. If your father's research is accurate, And if there really is something significant down there, you need to approach this more strategically. What do you mean? I mean you need proper equipment, adequate help, and a realistic timeline. You also need to document everything you're doing so that if you do find something, it'll have scientific credibility. Bramwell pulled out his phone and started making notes. I've got excavation equipment sitting in my yard in Cincinnati. Mini excavator, soil screens, surveying tools. I can have them here by tomorrow morning if you want them. Cordelia stared at him. You're offering to help? I'm offering to help you do this right. Your father spent 20 years documenting evidence that mainstream academia ignored. If there's a chance he was right about something, I think we owe it to his memory to find out properly. But the neighbors, the complaints, my job, the neighbors will complain no matter what. But if we work efficiently and professionally, we can minimize the disruption. As for your job, you've got sick leave accumulated, right? 3 weeks of it. Then use it. This is important enough to take seriously, but only if we're going to take it seriously. Half measures and midnight digging sessions aren't going to work. I found myself caught up in Uncle Bramwell's practical optimism. What about documentation? If Cordelia finds something, how do we make sure it's handled properly? I know people at the Ohio Historical Society, former clients who owe me favors. If we find anything significant, I can make sure the right experts get involved quickly. Cordelia sat down heavily on the edge of her excavation, looking overwhelmed by the sudden shift from family intervention to family support. You really think Dad might have been right? I think your father was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He wouldn't have spent 20 years documenting something unless he had good reason to believe it was worth documenting. Uncle Bramwell walked to the edge of the hole and looked down into the excavation Cordelia had been working on alone. The question is, are you ready to do this properly, or are you just working through grief? Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up at both of us with the determined expression I remembered from our childhood. The look she got when she'd decided to tackle a challenge that everyone else thought was too difficult for her. I'm ready to find out what Dad spent 20 years trying to tell us. Uncle Bramwell was true to his word. By 10 o'clock the next morning, his crew had delivered a compact excavator, professional soil screens, and surveying equipment that made Cordelia's hand tools look like toys. But more importantly, they'd brought something I hadn't expected: legitimacy. When neighbors saw professional equipment and workers in hard hats following proper safety protocols, the complaints stopped. Suddenly, we looked less like a family in crisis and more like a family with a serious research project. Cordelia worked alongside Bramwell's foreman, directing the excavation with the confidence of someone who'd spent weeks studying proper archaeological techniques. She'd created a grid system, marked measurement points, and insisted on photographing every layer of soil as they went deeper. By noon, they'd reached 6 feet, the depth where Dad's notes indicated the anomalies were strongest. Soil's changing here, called out Miguel, Bramwell's most experienced operator. Getting harder, more compressed, like there's something underneath that's been pressing down for a long time. Cordelia's excitement was barely contained, but she maintained her methodical approach. Stop the excavator. We go by hand from here. For the next 2 hours, Cordelia, Bramwell, and I carefully removed soil with brushes and small tools, working in the grid pattern she'd established. The anticipation was killing me. Every scrape of dirt felt like it might reveal something extraordinary, or prove that we'd spent 2 days chasing an impossible dream. At 2:30 p.m., Cordelia's brush struck something that made a sound completely different from soil or rock. She froze, her hand suspended over the spot where she'd been working. "What is it?" I asked. "Metal. Definitely metal." We worked around the spot carefully, clearing away dirt grain by grain. Slowly, the edge of what appeared to be a large, flat object began to emerge. It wasn't rusty iron or corroded steel. It was green-brown, with the distinctive patina of aged copper. "Oh my God," Cordelia whispered. Dad was right. The object was larger than we'd initially thought. As we cleared more soil, we could see intricate patterns etched into the metal surface. Not random scratches or natural oxidation patterns, but deliberate, sophisticated designs that looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Uncle Bramwell called his contact at the Ohio Historical Society without waiting for our permission. "Dr. Rachel Pemberton," he said into his phone. "You need to see this now. Edmund Maven's research was accurate. We found something." While we waited for Dr. Pemberton to arrive, we continued clearing soil from around the copper plate. That's when we discovered it wasn't just a single artifact. There was an opening beneath it, a space that suggested a small chamber or cavity. "There's more down there," Cordelia said, her voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. "Dad's notes mentioned subsurface structures. What if this is just the entrance?" Dr. Pemberton arrived 45 minutes later with a team of graduate students and enough professional equipment to make our earlier efforts look amateur. She was a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that comes from decades of careful scientific work. Her reaction to the copper plate was immediate and dramatic. "This is pre-Columbian, definitely pre-Columbian. The craftsmanship, the patina patterns, the artistic style. This could be Hopewell culture, maybe earlier. But the size and complexity suggest something we've never seen before in Ohio." As her team carefully lifted the copper plate, we could see that it had indeed been covering a small chamber. The space below contained what appeared to be additional artifacts, smaller copper pieces, carved stone objects, and what looked like preserved organic materials. "Dr. Pemberton," one of her graduate students called out, "you need to see this. The preservation is incredible. Whatever this site is, it's been protected from the elements for centuries, maybe millennia." Dr. Pemberton looked at Cordelia with something approaching awe. "Your father's research, his documentation of the subsurface anomalies, this is going to revolutionize our understanding of pre-Columbian Ohio. The implications are staggering." "What kind of implications?" I asked. "The sophistication of these artifacts suggests a more advanced civilization than we've previously documented in this region. The copper work alone indicates trade networks and metallurgical knowledge that we didn't think existed here. And if the radiocarbon dating confirms what I suspect about the age of these materials, we're looking at rewriting textbooks." Cordelia sat back on her heels, covered in dirt but glowing with vindication. "Dad knew, somehow he knew all along. Your father was brilliant," Dr. Pemberton said. "This discovery validates decades of research that the academic community dismissed too quickly. The Maven archaeological discovery is going to make headlines not just locally, but nationally, maybe internationally." By evening, news vans had begun arriving on Maple Street. By the next morning, our quiet neighborhood had transformed into a media circus. But this time, instead of being the crazy woman who dug holes at night, Cordelia had become the visionary researcher who'd vindicated her father's life work. The copper plate that started it all was carefully transported to Ohio State's archaeology lab for detailed analysis. But even before the results came back, we knew our lives had changed forever. Dad's fringe theories had become groundbreaking discoveries, and our family had gone from private grief to public celebration in the span of 3 extraordinary days. 6 months later, I'm standing in the backyard of our childhood home, watching archaeologists from 3 different universities carefully excavate what's now officially known as the Maven Archaeological Site, the hole that Cordelia started digging. In desperation at 3 in the morning has become a professionally managed dig site with grant funding, graduate student researchers, and a waiting list of experts who want to study the artifacts. The radiocarbon dating results exceeded everyone's expectations. The copper artifacts are nearly 3,000 years old, predating any known advanced metalwork in Ohio by centuries. The site contains evidence of a sophisticated pre-Columbian civilization that had trade networks extending from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. National Geographic featured the discovery on their cover last month, with a photo of Cordelia holding the original copper plate and smiling beside a portrait of our father. But the real transformation happened to our family, not just to archaeological textbooks. Cordelia returned to teaching, but everything about her approach changed. Her classroom became a laboratory where students learned to think like researchers instead of just memorizing facts. She started a program where high school students collaborate with university archaeologists on ongoing research projects. Last month, 3 of her students discovered a secondary site 2 miles from our house using ground-penetrating radar techniques they'd learned in her class. The Edmund Maven Foundation, which Cordelia established with her share of the National Geographic licensing fees, now provides grants to amateur researchers whose theories might be too unconventional for traditional funding sources. They've supported 17 projects so far, from mineral surveys in Montana to underwater archaeology in Lake Erie. 3 of those projects have yielded significant discoveries. Mom moved back to Ohio in February, not because she had to, but because she wanted to be part of what she calls Edmund's Vindication Tour. She's become the Foundation's volunteer coordinator and spends her days fielding calls from researchers around the country who have theories they want to explore. She told me last week that she finally understands what Dad meant when he used to say that the Earth holds more secrets than we can imagine. Uncle Bramwell expanded his construction company to include archaeological support services. He's now the go-to contractor for dig sites across the Midwest, providing equipment and expertise for excavations that require both scientific precision and construction know-how. He says it's the most satisfying work he's ever done because every project has the potential to change how we understand the past. The discovery changed me too, though in ways that took longer to recognize. Watching Cordelia trust her instincts, despite everyone's skepticism, made me realize how often I'd avoided taking risks because I was afraid of being wrong or looking foolish. I left my job in Columbus and started my own consulting firm, helping small businesses implement sustainable practices. It's not archaeology, but it requires the same willingness to challenge conventional thinking that Dad always encouraged. The neighbors who complained about Cordelia's midnight digging have become some of the site's biggest supporters. Mrs. Whitmore gives tours to visiting researchers and has become something of a local historian. Harold Whitmore jokes that living next to a famous archaeological site has doubled their property value, which is probably true. But the most profound change has been in how we remember our father. For years after his death, we'd focused on what he didn't accomplish, the theories that weren't accepted, the recognition that never came. The discovery didn't just vindicate his research, it helped us understand that his greatest contribution wasn't any single finding, but the way he taught us to see possibilities where others saw only problems. Last Sunday, Cordelia and I visited Dad's grave for the first time since the discovery made national news. We brought one of the smaller copper artifacts, a piece that the archaeologist said we could keep as family legacy items. As we placed it on his headstone, Cordelia said something that perfectly captured what these 6 months have meant to our family. "I used to think grief was about missing what you'd lost," she said. "But I think it's really about discovering what you still have." Dad didn't leave us when he died. He left us a mystery to solve, and solving it brought us closer together than we'd been in years. The archaeological work at the Maven site will continue for at least another 5 years. Researchers believe we've only uncovered about 20% of what's buried in our backyard. But for our family, the real discovery was already complete. We learned that love doesn't end with death, that persistence can overcome skepticism, and that sometimes the people who seem crazy are simply seeing truths the rest of us aren't ready to understand. Dad always said the Earth remembers everything. What we discovered is that families remember everything too, and sometimes it takes a crisis to help us remember what really matters. The copper plate that made headlines was just the beginning. The real treasure was realizing that we'd never actually lost our father at all. He'd just been waiting for us to start digging in the right place.